organized crime teamed up with, provably teamed up with the U.S. intelligence in the World War II era, were very supportive of ethno-nationalism and ethno-fascism, specifically citing the Benito Mussolini model of Italy. Mm-hmm.
And so why is that?
Well, I guess it seems to be the best system that benefits, an oligarchy at the end of the day. Because, I mean, look at the CIA and what type of regime it tends to install historically when it coups somewhere. Fascist dictatorship. And basically, a fascist dictatorship, the Mussolini model, he called it corporatism. It's basically a fusion of the public and private sector. It's the ultimate public-private partnership, as they're now called, because it sounds a lot nicer. It's not the dirty F word, right? But, functionally, especially when you consider that the public sector is provably dominated and corrupted by these same private sector forces, and those same private sector forces are tied to intelligence and organized crime more often than not, who's really running the partnership at the end of the day? And so generally, these powers that be are interested, in one thing. So, I mean, if you think about it, like, organized crime as an entity, what is organized crime most interested in? It's expanding and perpetuating their rackets, their illicit businesses, and preventing law enforcement snooping or meddling in their businesses. And so ultimately, fascism facilitates that same type of model, really, especially if you are an organized crime outfit and you've merged your rackets with intelligence agencies and given them state protection. Right. But, as I mentioned, a while ago, there's been a longstanding effort to sort of blur the line between the illicit ventures of organized crime and their legitimate ventures. And so really, when you're looking at some of these oligarchs and some of these connections, it's hard to tell where the illicit ones end and the legitimate ones begin, because they've kind of merged into the same thing. And some people have argued, for example, that if it wasn't for the illicit drug industry, Wall Street would collapse because they are so involved, even though they're not prosecuted for it, in the money laundering and a lot of the other, upkeep of that illicit criminal enterprise, and it benefits them hugely. And this is why, you have massive banks like HSBC, for example, be provably outed for laundering money for Mexican drug cartels, and nothing happens to them. Why is that? Well, it's because all the big banks do that kind of stuff. And I mean, there's records of banks doing that. The most famous of it is the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or BCCI. And BCCI basically exploded in 1991 and was investigated by the Senate. They found all these ties to arms trafficking, drugs trafficking, organized crime intelligence agencies, sex trafficking of prepubescent children even was something this bank engaged in, and it was just completely covered up. And the CIA had allegedly created that bank. But it operated as a development bank. It's public-facing. I guess it's public-facing face. Sorry, that's not the most eloquent way to say it. But it framed itself as a development bank and specifically held the reserves of central banks of countries in the global south, like Peru, for example, and was using a lot of that money to facilitate these crimes and all sorts of crazy things. And, that type of criminal activity absolutely continues. And, because of how our system is set up, it's not prosecuted. White collar crime is never prosecuted, really, in the United States. Definitely not at that level, because now they've, the illegitimate and the legitimate worlds have become so interlinked by these entities that you can't stop the illicit one without breaking the whole system,
Given all the controversial, dangerous things that you talk about, have you faced any threats?
I mean, I intentionally don't do, things that I think would get me in trouble. Like, I don't work with whistleblowers. I only use things that are publicly available as my sourcing. I don't publish, illegally obtained, as the government would say, sensitive documents and things like that. because, if I think it's been abundantly clear since after what happened to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange that that's the easiest way to get yourself in a heap full of trouble. I also don't live in the United States, which which might help, but I don't really have any illusions about that since, I live in South America and most South American countries are de facto US colonies. I don't really worry about it because this is the work that I like to do. Personally, it's what interests me writing about this stuff. And I think, it's important to talk about this stuff, especially now when a lot of the entities I've been writing about for several years, like Palantir, for example, are now, more powerful than ever. And I kind of anticipate that it's important to do it now because I think the censorship about these types of things is going to get significantly worse, despite a lot of the free speech posturing of the current administration. I am extremely doubtful that's going to last. And I think a lot of the media environment is increasingly manipulated by algorithms, specifically people that are algorithms that are controlled by people close to the current administration. And so and also, working at a time when AI generated content is being boosted intentionally over human made content on a lot of these platforms, including Twitter X, including YouTube. And so I think, it's really only a matter of time before the media environment becomes extremely controlled, and maybe it will be gradual. It won't be announced necessarily. But I think, critical reporting on what's happening right now is going to be sort of de facto deboosted and sort of sent to the bottom of the pile, which is why I think it's very important for people to take control over their own news feeds. And the best way to do that is with an RSS reader where you can plug in all of the websites or podcasts or whatever you follow and then generate your own news feed without having some sort of Silicon Valley middleman with a political agenda there, trying to boost certain creators and certain outlets to you that more often than not tend to take money from Peter Thiel. What do you know? So, the kind of work that people that are critical of that, obviously, maybe I'm biased in that sense because that's the kind of work I do. But I think it's important because having an echo chamber about these types of powerful figures is problematic. And it's particularly problematic because these Silicon Valley oligarchs that have become increasingly influential have been cultivating independent media for years and have dominate financially a lot of the competitor platforms to YouTube, for example, like Rumble, having JD Vance and Peter Thiel and all these people, being really the money behind it. So I think, it's important to break that echo chamber that they've been constructing to sort of frame these people as libertarian or pro-liberty, but they're really not libertarian at all. Peter Thiel is on record saying that free market competition is for losers. That doesn't sound like a libertarian for me. And if you look at Peter Thiel's own history, he's interested in creating monopolies with the direct involvement of the state, arguably more often than not, the national security state. And I definitely do not think that's libertarianism. I think that's more, fascism. And ultimately, the house philosopher of the PayPal mafia, as he's sometimes called, Curtis Yarvin, who's been influential on JD Vance and some of these other figures that are very politically powerful right now. His ambition is to have the US government remake itself really as a corporation with a CEO running it as dictator, and that Americans need to get over their dictator phobia, and wants to create what he calls, a Gov Corp or a Sov Corp, a government corporation, sovereign corporation. I don't think that will go well, frankly. Even if you tend to be libertarian leading, okay, it's the private sector running everything, but it's an extreme centralization of power. And that historically does not go well and leads directly to authoritarianism, whether it's the public or private sector that's centralized in controlling all of that power. And a lot of these figures, Yarvin included, Thiel included, speak very lowly of the masses in a lot of their writing and reading, and are, similar to a lot of the elites that are, poo-pooed and were by the pro-Trump media and were supposedly voted out in the last election. And, supposedly Peter Thiel and all of these guys, if you believe Barry Weiss and those types, are the counter elites. But really, at the end of the day, they're not.
Right.
You could argue maybe they're a slightly different faction than the elites that were backing Biden and these other figures. Sure. But I think ultimately they have the same ends, which is increased control over society, increasing the centralization of power, and basically leading us to a neo-feudal paradigm that's enforced by, technology.
Right. And if anyone had any doubts about the free speech commitment of the Trump administration, all you have to do is look at what they're doing to students, protesters, just rounding them up, deporting them, trying to deport them.
For speech.
Over speech. Yeah, over speech. That's it.
Yeah, and it's really only a matter of time until they move the goalpost and start, maybe they won't go after green card holders. Eventually it'll be over American citizens over speech. Sure.
Probably with the transition, the segue probably being naturalized citizens next, because actually, she was the State Department was asked about that, and the spokeswoman would not rule out doing that, deporting naturalized citizens. So that's that's probably the order that we can look at it happening, expect it to happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's very possible. And if you're not allowed to criticize a foreign government and its war that we happen to be supporting, maybe today it's Israel, maybe next it will be the United Arab Emirates and their, in the Saudis and their war on Yemen that we also support, or any other war that the U.S. military decides to engage in, or regime change it decides to support elsewhere. It's bonkers.